What does it mean when you're standing there and you find yourself really enjoying listening to what a politician says? You're like, yeah, right on. Why is this even controversial? Why is this a conversation? But it is a conversation, and that is the part of the program that we are now going to get to. It is my pleasure to moderate an incredibly talented and experienced group of individuals who are here to talk to us about building and the state of housing in the city and the state of California. So if we could advance the slides, because this is the part where I'm going to get things out of order. All right, help me welcome our first panelist, Darlene Chu Bryant, who is the Executive Director of China SF. Fun fact, she once worked for our now Lieutenant Governor, Gavin Newsom, and lived both in Laurel Heights and Chinatown. And if you ask her, she will tell you the best bakery is Washington Bakery at Grant Street. Anyone want to disagree? We'll see. All right, if we could advance the slides. Todd David. Todd David has been involved in several. Come on up, Todd. Todd David is the new executive director of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. He took that role last November, I believe, November of 16. He is a Noe Valley resident, and if you ask him, the best coffee in Noe Valley is at Martha Brothers or Bernie's. So thank you for joining us, Todd. All right, next up we have Alan Mark. Come on up, Alan. When your name is Alan Mark and the name of the company is the Mark Company, do I really need to say anything else? However, this is San Francisco, and San Francisco real estate loves rumors. So I want to get this out of the way in advance. At some point during this afternoon's presentation, Alan is going to get up and he is going to walk off stage. And in advance, I want you to know it's not because he's mad at me or I said something really, really dumb, although those things could actually both happen. He's a last-minute join for us, and he has to leave early. So thank you very much for joining us, Alan. Really appreciate it. All right, next up, we do not have Supervisor from District 11, Asha Safai, and I've been practicing saying his name all day long. Unfortunately, we got a last-minute cancellation from him. It's the life of a supervisor in San Francisco, but we appreciate that he was even willing to be seen with us in public, and we hope to get him at a future event. All right, from San Francisco Planning, Joshua Switsky. So Joshua is a resident of the Richmond district, and Cinderella is his favorite coffee shop. All right. And finally, if you will help me in welcoming Christy Wang from Spur. Thank you so much. All right, so we have an incredibly talented and accomplished panel, and I'm going to start things off with a question for Todd from SF Housing Action Coalition. And the very first question is briefly, 45 seconds or less, Todd, could you explain what SF HAC does and advocates for?
Sure. So, again, my name is Todd David. I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. And the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition, SF HAC, we advocate for housing at all income levels. So we advocate for affordable housing, we advocate for moderate middle income housing, and we advocate for market rate housing. How's that for a...
That is a great start. So kind of at a high level, when you're advocating for housing and you're out there having these conversations, from your point of view, what can be done to reform how housing is approved in San Francisco to make it either faster or more affordable?
Well, believe it or not, I think the more affordable is the easier to answer. It's building more housing, this is actually a controversial statement in San Francisco, but supply and demand does exist here. And if we actually build more housing, the price of housing will come down. In like the past 20 years in San Francisco, we've brought onto market about 1,400 units per year, about 1,400 units per year over the last 20 years. And as Senator Wiener was saying, 20 years ago, housing was less expensive than it is today. In 2016 alone, we brought about 5,000 units of housing online in 2016. And what happened since 2016 today? Rents are starting to go down.
Are you suggesting those are related?
I'm suggesting they might be. They might be. People might disagree with that, but yes, that is.
Have you thought of a career in economics?
I'm not good at drawing curves and stuff like that. So then, I think the first part of the question was, what can we do to make the process quicker?
Yes.
There's not a short answer to that. There's a lot of things. How many pages is the planning code? How many pages? 2,000. 2,000 pages. So there's a lot of, John Ram, who's the head of the planning department, was speaking at our regulatory committee meeting this morning. He said San Francisco's planning department hears, I think, 5 times the amount of, they go over 5 times the amount of plans than New York City. Right, New York City has about the New York City Planning Department reviews about 500 plans a year. The San Francisco Planning Department reviews about 2,000, 2,500. Because we in San Francisco, the way that our laws are written, every permit, everything is potentially, you can appeal it, and it's so there's a lot of, as John said, there's not one silver bullet, there's like 20 little silver bullets that need to all be done simultaneously. But that just kind of gives you an idea of like our 2,000-page planning code.
Absolutely, and that's actually a great one. I want to introduce and say thank you to Joshua for joining us from the San Francisco Planning Department. I mean, he's out in public with realtors from the Planning Department, perhaps one of the toughest jobs in San Francisco, a department that gets no credit, and no matter what they do, it is the wrong decision. So thank you very much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. Let's give him a round. So, as Todd has pointed out, you've been given kind of an impossible task. As we're out there, talking with our clients about what planning does and can't do, can you kind of help us understand, the constraints and the position you're put in as a department?
Sure. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about what we do, what we've done a lot over the last few years. If I could get that one slide up. We've been very busy. I've been in the planning department about 15 and a half years, and we have been basically undoing a lot of the things that Senator Wiener talked about were done in the 60s, which was downzoning a lot of the city. I personally have been involved in almost every plan that the city's adopted in the last 15 years, which is pretty much all of the plans the city's adopted in the last 25 years. When we started, around when my tenure started, the city was zoned for about 40 to 50,000 housing units. We've added to that capacity over 100,000 units in the last 10 to 15 years. And this map is kind of gives you a general sense about where all that housing can go. And so the housing boom that we're seeing now, and this 5,000 units a year that was just mentioned, that wouldn't have happened if we didn't do all this planning over the last 15 years and introduce actually a lot of reforms that came along with those efforts, including more expedited environmental review and planning commission review, and reforming a lot of the terrible zoning code that was dragging the city down over the last several decades, like really low density limits and really draconian parking requirements, and a lot of this really 1950s stuff that we've gradually been undoing, mostly on the eastern half of the city. And so everything, all the cranes in the sky you see today are really all the result of the work that we've done with planning. And it's been expanding citywide in terms of some of the great legislation that we've managed to get through in the last couple of years, including Home SF and in-law legislation that we've worked with folks like Supervisor Wiener, to really try to open up more of the rest of the city for more growth. So we've really done a lot, and maybe folks don't recognize it, but I sleep well at night, so.
Home SF was just something that recently passed. Would you mind explaining for our audience just very briefly what that will enable?
Sure. Home SF is sort of a density bonus program where property owners in districts that still have density limits, which are most of our neighborhood commercial districts, and a few residential districts around the city, not the single-family districts and the two-family districts, but mostly the commercial corridors. They're allowed up to 2 stories of density bonus in exchange for some additional a few extra affordable units. And so it's really tried to calibrate it so that people would take advantage of it and hopefully override some of the other restrictions that are keeping folks from developing today and producing housing.
And that was legislation that was sponsored by Supervisor Katie Tang and passed 11-0, so thank you to Supervisor Tang. I'm going to head over here to Alan Mark for our next question, and we've been talking kind of very high-level advocacy, planning, zoning. You're the one who's out there talking to developers. What are developers saying these days?
Well, hold on. One issue is, can you hear me now? There we go. One issue is the fact that developers that do have entitled land, if they purchased the land a few years ago and then put a lot of money into entitlements, they're finding now that the market kind of peaked in summer of 2015, and the cost of construction has continually gone up and is continually going up. Forecasts are about 8% this year. And the other issue is the cost of construction, I should say, to get financing has been very difficult. So I find a lot of developers are really caught with, they want to build, but right now it's really hard to get, whether it's equity partners or a construction loan. Often they do have to put more down, and I do find they're being stymied, and I do think this is going to continue. So you have that part with the developers that have approvals, and then other developers, I mean, it's been this classic issue for years. They think it may take a couple of years, but it takes 3 to 4 years, or they thought it took 3 years and it took 5 years. And that's, I think, the other issue. At the same time, when they come to the end of that road and try to get financing, they're all going to be in that same situation. So I do think we're going to see less construction happening on some projects where developers are newer to the game and aren't as seasoned.
So it sounds like we've kind of got to that point in the cycle where everyone is feeling very, very cautious and doesn't want to be the person that is the first one to fall over the cliff, as it were, in terms of kind of future investment.
Well, I'd say on the financing side, I think developers like to take risks, and they'd like to go to the edge and push the prices, and we may forecast 3% appreciation a year, some may push it further, but I think they're all trying really to get financing and hoping that the market continues.
And I'm not going to put you on the spot for any particular project, but you represent a lot of new developments. The developers of those projects, you know, if I was to go read certain blogs, I would think that the world is over, the sky has fallen, and everything in San Francisco will be free tomorrow. That's not what we're seeing. You know, what are you seeing in terms of current market activity and supply and demand?
It's a very healthy market. I would say the market really started picking up until about, in terms of absorption, right before Christmas, continued right until the beginning of March. There was a lull in March, and then since the beginning of April, it really has picked up. And that's true whether it is at a product, let's say like the Austin, which is Pine and Polk, which in certain ways is kind of a more affordable product where, I mean, everybody is aware, whether it's under $1 million or under $1.5 million, all the way to 181 Fremont, where your typical costs are purchase price is over $3 million. So it has really picked up. We only have 850 brand new units on the market. The peak of the market in terms of number of units was 2007, 2008 with 3,000 units. And we never really had a hangover from the recession like Los Angeles did. And of those 3,000, one half were in 3 separate buildings that were close by. I don't think we're really going to ever, and we sell about on average, this whole city, new construction, about 875 units a year. And I do not think we're going to have more than 1,500 new units on the market right through the end of this decade.
All right, you heard it here first. So from a kind of, you mentioned financing and constraints on development there, so I was going to bring Darlene into the conversation. One of our larger recent projects, still selling, is Lumina, which was a joint venture with Tishman Spear and China Vanke Bank. Since the election and kind of just this year in general, how have we seen a change in interest in foreign investment in real estate?
Actually, there has not been any change. Interest continues. The larger companies are coming, continue to come to San Francisco. Recently, 2 new, very well-known companies have actually secured projects or an interest in certain projects in San Francisco. So the interest is continuing and hasn't stopped or slowed anything down. As a matter of fact, of course, we will find it odd being San Franciscans, but when you talk to a developer such as one of the, I think he's the chairman of Gemdale, who we all know is a part of Lincoln Properties, he says, before the election, he said, well, I think it's okay with Trump becoming president. I looked at him, what? And he said, you know, he's a businessman. It'll be different. And I couldn't say anything after that.
It's been different, hasn't it? So there hasn't been kind of any change in terms of the interest level in terms of doing projects. Has the interest in terms of the type of projects changed at all?
I would say yes. I'd say in the past, the interest has been to come in, buy a project, develop from the ground up without any joint ventures involved, no partners. What I'm starting to see is, 1, there's more joint ventures. 2, that they are more and more companies are buying stabilized assets. People are starting to look at hotels, and instead of building for condos, they're actually building so that they can lease, so apartment buildings.
So it sounds like there's definitely been a shift away kind of from multifamily, which was the big darling of the last couple of years.
Yes.
All right. So
Matt, if I could just add, I'd be very hard pressed to think of a high-profile project that is being built or soon to be built in San Francisco or Los Angeles that does not have a Chinese partner.
that's actually a great point. Yeah. So thank you. That is a very good point.